What is up, everybody? It's Don with TheDonTech. Thank you so much for clicking on this video and coming along on this journey of this build guide with me. There's a lot of computer build guides out there, but none quite like this as far as I know. I'm not going to say I haven't watched a single video out there on building a computer, but I've not watched a single video out there on building a computer. I've dealt with enough people who have watched those guides and tried to build computers and then brought it to me to fix it. I have fixed and built thousands of computers, thousands upon thousands. So I was realizing there needs to be obviously some all-encompassing video that talks about all the pitfalls that you need to look out for when you're building a computer. And that's exactly what I hope to provide with this particular video. Straight away, what you might notice is, hey Don, this video is odd because the computer is not on a desk. It looks like it's on a wall, but this is not your original wall-mounted computer, and this doesn't even look like a computer case that can go on the wall. How did you do it? Well, lucky for you, there is a video in store for that. If it's already been uploaded to the channel, it will be here or there. Why am I doing this? I hate it when I do this in post, or it's going to be in a link in the description or in a pinned comment where you can find that video. But that's not going to be the topic of discussion for this particular video. For now, we're going to go into the components and why I chose what I chose. When I wanted to build this computer, one of the first things I had in my mind is, what can I reuse that I already have lying around? And a majority of these things I already had lying around. All I had to buy was the Asus motherboard and the Intel i7-13700KF processor. I don't typically recommend using the KF variant because the F variant would mean that there's no dedicated graphics chip on the actual processor. And that's not usually a problem because you're going to be using a graphics card, but if you do the build and you don't get any post, you don't get any video, it might be because of the slot on the board or the actual graphics card itself. Usually what I would do in that situation is you take the graphics card out and you plug into the motherboard's graphics. That would be the slot that's going up and down, not, horizontally. And with doing that, you'd be able to get video and tell you if the graphics card was bad because you'd be getting video, whereas with the graphics card you weren't. So usually, especially if it's your first build, I'd recommend not using the KF variant. K just means it's unlocked and overclockable. But I got an exceptionally good deal, so I couldn't pass it up. But my other components, the RAM, the all-in-one cooler, the fans, the graphics card, the SSDs, all that stuff I already had lying around. So let's go through what those are, and then we can get on to the build guide itself. Starting off with the motherboard, it is an Asus Z790 Strix DDR4 based motherboard. It's an exceptionally good board. And I got that at a really good deal, but even if it wasn't a great deal, it's a great board to have. I'm using, in this particular situation right here, it is G.Skill 64 gigs DDR4 RAM. In the build, I used my Corsair Dominator that was 32 gigs, but there was such a long period of time from when I filmed that to when I'm doing the intro right now that I've actually upgraded some of those other components. The graphics card right now is a 2080 Ti, but in the build guide, I was using a 1080 that I had lying around. One of the other parts that I had to purchase that I forgot about, even though it's right in front of me, was this case. This is the Leon Lee 011D dynamic case, Republic of Gamers certified sort of case. Beautiful case. I loved working on it. I loved wall mounting it. I would definitely recommend that case. I had this Corsair cooler lying around. It's a 240mm Radiator, and that was able to work just fine for this particular build. And for the storage, I have two drives inside of it. The boot drive is a Samsung 980 Pro 2TB drive, and just the extra media drive is a Samsung 1TB 980 Evo drive. Both of these are NVMe, and they're tucked away nicely under the board. It gives it a slick, clean look. So after all those shenanigans of the intro, let's go ahead and go down to this video where I will guide you through every step of the process that I took in making this video to go from all the components on the desk to mounted nicely inside the case, getting the power on, going into the Windows operating system, and teaching you additional tips and tricks that you need to know about for your build along the way. Before we get into the actual build guide itself, there were some things that didn't make it into that build guide as easily, so I wanted to add it into the introduction. So this stuff is just as important as the build guide will be. Quick little tidbits when you're going through and doing the actual build itself is that you want to make sure that you are going to be properly grounded by touching some sort of a metal object that's usually going to be steel, not aluminum, and you're going to want to make sure that you're grounded. That will discharge all the electricity that's on you, and you want to do that sometimes throughout the build as well if you're shuffling on carpet. And speaking of carpet, don't build on carpet. Don't wear socks if you're going to be standing on carpet, and just don't build it on carpet. Build it on a hard, flat surface. This is just my IKEA countertop desk that I built it on after discharging myself. You do those things, you're going to prevent the chances of accidentally damaging any of your components. Another easy tip is to make sure that the back power supply, the switch, has an I and an O. If it's in the I position, that means it's on. O means off. If you have everything all plugged up, you plug in the computer to the power, you turn it on, it doesn't turn on, check the power supply, it might be in the O position. And the final pro tip before we get into the build guide is going to be that when you're getting everything all built out and you're almost completed with it, you have enough stuff wired up. You've got fans on, you've got the connector for the CPU cooler, you've got everything all set pretty much. You're like 80% of the way done. You want to do a power on test to make sure that you get video. Because if you do the entire build and then you find out a component is defective, you have to undo everything. Whereas if you get 80%, you still have some wiggle room to take some components out before you've committed fully to the actual build. Oh hey, it's me looking at something on the computer screen that I needed to add into the intro that I forgot about. I just wanted to let you know real quick that any and all cuts you see are to help the flow of the video, and I tried not to remove anything that would make the build look easier. So now, on to the build guide. So now that we went through all that stuff and we're on the next step, let me get the camera facing me so I know what I'm doing here. We have everything all laid out and ready to be built with. So a lot of the way that I do the builds are in a very specific, kind of like prep the case, prep the motherboard, install the board, install some cabling, install the AIO, install some of the cabling, and kind of go from there to make sure everything is as smooth as possible. So I've got my case, that's that O11 Dynamic XL from Leon Lee that I'm going to be wall mounting, and I've got a bucket full of accessories, I've got a bucket full of fans, because this case doesn't come with a single fan, and we need, I think, 7 of them, because I'm going to be doing 3 on the bottom, 3 on the top, and then 1 in the rear. My all-in-one cooler is going to go on the side with the hoses down below, traipsing upward as long as we've got enough space for that, otherwise I'll just rotate it. So you want to have a general idea of how you're going to do the build before you do the overall build, because if you just kind of go into it, you can lose parts, you can misplace things, and it can be a problem. So the first thing we're going to do is move the stuff out of the way that we're not going to be working with right now. The board, processor, power supply, graphics card, all-in-one cooler, accessories, all that sort of stuff. We're focusing specifically on the case disassembly right now and seeing what we need to do to wire up the fans inside of the case. Also make sure you have your screwdriver kits. So I've got my handy dandy screwdriver. I've used this to build every single one of my computers. And I've got this iFixit kit for all of my miscellaneous small things like the SSDs. Those have smaller screws than the standard Phillips. And we'll figure out what fans we have and what fans we want to use. And again, guys, there was a big emphasis on this being a budget build, which means that if I didn't have to spend the money on it, I did not spend the money on it. So as you can see, it's pretty gutted on the inside of the case. I did have a couple of things that were right here on this case that I've taken out already. Those were in the way when I was trying to wall mount it, so that kind of already has been done. Now I'm just taking out any of these cables and anything that is zip tied down, because you're not going to really need those sort of things. You want to be as clean as possible with your build. Now a lot of other cases already have these cables run in a very specific way, so those you're going to want to make sure stay where they are. So these are just kind of like standard cable connections, colors, and everything like that. I actually don't know if I'm going to be needing some of this stuff because I'm going to be removing these bottom feet from this case. So your mileage may vary, but now that I've got the case all set up pretty much for my next needs, the next thing that I would do is install the motherboard. So I'm going to take the case, I'm going to move it to the side for now because we're not going to need the case. So the next couple of things we have to work on is going to be the motherboard itself. Other things you might need would be maybe a knife to help cut things open. So this board just has a nice security seal. Hopefully your boards all come with a security seal. We're today using the Asus ROG Strix Z790A Gaming Wi-Fi DDR4. DDR4 was important because that was the RAM that I had and I didn't want to spend any additional money on getting new RAM. So with the board itself, this is where you want to be careful taking the motherboard out. Usually there's a little bit of a slant over here inside the box, or you can maybe take this entire shell out. Okay, so we can take this entire thing out. When you're taking this out, I'm being very gentle, very careful, holding it with a flat palm on the back. We're going to take the board out. Of the anti-static, and we're going to place it on the anti-static. The motherboard, the most important component pretty much for the computer. I've talked about this in previous videos, so make sure that you have watched those as well for the importance on the motherboards. So you want to do a brief little visual inspection, make sure nothing looks broken, bent, damaged, or anything like that. Most things you're going to be seeing would be if there's any damage to around here, the socket for the processor itself, maybe some damages to some capacitors. That's usually if you buy it used. If it's new, you're usually not going to have those problems. Some boards, like this one in particular, have a couple of sticky things to remove from them, and usually they're going to be on the stuff that looks pretty fancy. You know, like that was pretty fancy. I don't know if there's going to be any more. I actually have one right here. Sometimes they're colored and you can see them. Sometimes they break off. So it's important to remove a lot of these adhesive pieces because these are here to protect the device, but they can contain static electricity and they can short the device itself. So I think that's all of them for this particular motherboard. And then it's just pretty much installing components. Now you can choose any order that you want to install any of the following, but I'm going to do it in this order because it's easiest for me right now. Today we're doing the Intel Core i7 13700KF processor. So gently unboxing the processor. This one just has a little bit of documentation, manual, those sort of things. There's pull tabs from each side of the box here. And then you have the processor. So we're going to gently take that out. Installing the processor is a very, very delicate part. You have the processor right here, and there's no pins on the back of this. The pins are instead on the motherboard, the socket of the motherboard. Those pins can break and they can be damaged very, very easily. And these little contact points on the back here are subject to your finger grease and a whole bunch of other contaminants. So do not touch this with anything but the sides of your hands, and if you haven't already, wash your hands. So this is an Intel-based board installation. So the first thing you're going to do is pull on this retention bracket and then slide it outward to the right, which is going to lift up this tension rod over here, and then you're going to be able to pull up with this little piece here facing towards you. That's going to expose the socket inside. That's as far as the camera can zoom. So then we're going to open up the processor gently. It will line up in a very specific way. These have notches. I don't know if we're going to get the... these have notches on the top and the bottom of the processor. Those notches line up with the notches on the top and the bottom of the motherboard. These particular boards, they made it simple. The text, right side up, is exactly how it goes. Some processors, the text is left, right, up, or down if it's a square. These are more of a rectangular, so it makes it easy. So we're going to pick it up gently by the sides using gentle force. And if we have to move it to another hand, we're going to switch and do that way. So I'm going to gently place the processor down inside the CPU socket. It's going to just go right into place. You don't have to move it, you don't have to shift it, you don't have to position it. It falls straight into place. And we're going to take this arm over here on the bracket, we're going to pull it down, and then we're going to hold this down, and that's going to have this pop off. A little bit scary. That's okay. You want this to pop off from the install. Then take the retention arm with your opposite hand, bring it down, and clip it under the bracket on the underside to the right of the processor. And that's all you had to do for the processor. You can always rebox things at different points, but keeping your boxes of all your accessories together is very, very important. In the event that you need to do an RMA or something like that, and this as well, hang on to this in case you get a defective board, you have to return it under warranty for any reason, this is required. The next step of what I'm going to do is install the all-in-one cooler mounting brackets. So for the system to get cooling, it needs to have a heatsink on it. The heatsink goes right over the processor, and with that you need the specific mounting hardware. So we're using the Corsair H100i Elite all-in-one cooler. It comes with the Intel mounting hardware. That's AMD. We don't need any of those things. And then we also need this mounting hardware as well. This is the just miscellaneous hardware for the AIO in and of itself. So the first bag here has everything that we're going to need to mount the back bracket. You want to make sure to use the screws that coincide with your particular socket. So this is a socket 1700. So if we look at what came with this, we have three different bags. We have this Intel 2011/2066. We're not using that for this build. We have the Intel 1700. We are using that for this build. This is the 1700 socket, so these are the screws that you need to use. And then of course you do need this rear retention bracket. So this here is the back plate that holds the screws and will hold the all-in-one cooler in place. It has a little bit of 3M tape around it. You can remove that if you want, but it's not necessary. That can help hold it in place on the back here. The details and nuances of this are very difficult to get on screen, but if you can see here, this bracket moves left and right or up and down depending on your orientation. And you got to coincide this with the holes on the motherboard so that way you can have it properly go through. It's not all that complex. Usually you just start with all four down, or like, you know, in as far as they can go, not out as far as they can go. I'm having to do some of this stuff with my opposite hand because I don't want to cover the stuff. So we're just going to go behind, and it might help if you can see it. But just like that, we got 3 of the 4 inside. Okay, so now we have all 4 of the 4. I guess this one actually you can do at the top or the bottom. Kudos to Intel for doing that. So then you need your 4 screws, and these threads are the same on both the front and the back, so it doesn't matter which threading goes in which direction. So you're just going to go through. It doesn't matter if you do a cross pattern because there's no tension with this. You can do any screw in any order. So I'm supporting the back of the motherboard up at an angle with my left hand, and I'm putting the screws in with my right hand while I keep that bracket up against the motherboard. And the back of my hand is not touching the table, but it's touching the anti-static bag that's below it. So when you have the bracket installed in the back for your cooler, if you're using the all-in-one cooler specifically, you want to make sure that these are tightened very nicely with your fingers. If you didn't thread them correctly, then they might tighten prematurely. So the next thing I like to install are going to be the SSDs. In this build, I'm using a 2 terabyte Samsung 980 Pro NVMe SSD and a 980 standard SSD that's just 1 terabyte, both from Samsung. And we're going to use a screw head that we think works for this. This is a PH0, Phillips 0. If we looked on the motherboard manual, we would see that we have an SSD bracket under here and another SSD bracket most likely under here. This is where reading the manual does come in handy. I'm just going to guessing. So gently remove this. We're going to set this over to the side. The screws in there stay. They're not going to fall off, so you don't have to worry about those. Now this is a big problem that I see a lot. There's a post in here. You can see this post right here. This post holds the NVMe SSD in place. Not all motherboards have this already installed. Some of them come with that with the motherboard, so check your documentation. All you have to do, you have to first take off this blue, I guess not the blue, yeah it is blue. Okay, cool, hey, it's blue. This blue colored, it's not tape, it's just a covering. And that covering, a little sticky, it's on the door now, is actually just a protectant of the thermal pad. So the SSD, let's see if we can get this to show up here. This SSD's got some notches on it, as you can tell. So to my right, it's got the couple of pins, a notch, and then a whole bunch more pins. That is very important as to how it gets installed. And you also have the screw mount section that's over on this side. So this one's going to be installing upside down, so it looks like. So you have just is going to go into the left here at an angle. It pushes in until it can't push in anymore, and then you're going to gently push it down onto the base. This little plastic rivet right here will rotate either to the left or to the right, and it will hold the SSD in place. And when you're installing this heatsink back onto it, you need to make sure you remove the blue plastic film so you can get full effect of the thermal pad with that, and that will help absorb and dissipate the heat from these SSDs. Once you have that removed on the thermal pad side, you can go ahead and put it back. These are sometimes difficult to line up as to where they need to go. All right, there we go. Actually, I'm going to increase the bit thickness of this, will give me more torque. So now we are on a PH1. So there's no screws on this, So there's not going to be an SSD slot under here, but there are screws here. So this is where the second SSD slot is, and that's where the second SSD is going to be installed. Your motherboard may not have the heatsink shroud, and that is okay as well. It is a little bit better for them to have heat sinks, especially if you're using the Pro version. You will need the heatsink for those. Second SSD slot is right here, and then this is going to go at the same upside down angle as it slides in gently. Push it down, make sure it goes on that tension mount, on that mounting rod, and then it's secured into place and it's held in. Your SSD should not lift up in any capacity. It should be fully flush and fully flat. This heatsink shroud has another blue pad. You're going to want to remove that as well. Sometimes the thermal pad may come with it. So just be as delicate and gentle as you can to get that piece off. And then this one, we should have really figured out which direction it's going, but it's pretty easy. So it's not going this direction. Wait. I thought it was pretty easy. Yeah, okay, it lines up with the text. It's important to install the primary SSD in the top slot because that gives you the most bandwidth and uses the most PCI lanes for the best clearance of your system being able to take advantage of the power that you're putting inside of it. You're never going to reach the theoretical max speeds, but you still want to install the best things up top. Similar with graphics cards, you don't want to install your graphics card in the bottom PCI slot. You install it in the top one so it can take advantage of the most hardware power that it's given. The next and only real final prep that we need to do on this motherboard is installing the RAM. So here I've got 32 gigs of Corsair Dominator Platinum DDR4 3000 megahertz. And I've used these in another build. Fantastic RAM slots, fantastic memory sticks. And what you'll notice about RAM is that DDR4, DDR5, DDR whatever, they've got more notches or more pins on one side versus the other. So this top side here has slightly fewer pins than the ones on the bottom. How many are there? I don't know. Is that relevant? No. That coincides with how you install the memory. So the memory in this particular case is going to go with the fewer amount of pins on the bottom and then the larger amount of pins on the top. There are 4 clips for the RAM right up here, and if you're installing 2 memory kits or just 2 RAM sticks, you want to install them usually in the far right and then the third slot to the right or to the left. That way it can take advantage of dual channel, but if you're using all 4 RAM sticks, you can put them anywhere you want to put them. How these are going to go, we're going to start in on both sides, and it's just now even, and it's in there, but it's not clipped in yet. And on both sides, on the top and the bottom, we're going to push down at the same time until we hear the clicks. We hear a click out of the bottom that it's in, and then at the top, the tension little rod here goes from like this to like that. Out. And then this particular RAM says the type on the side, and it's going to just say Dominator DDR4. So in order to, instead of having to look which one has more or less pins and everything, all you have to do is just line up the text with each side and then they can go in. So we're going to start with this slot, going to go down right in the center for both, push down on the left and the right, and they're both clipped in. Stick number 3, and then stick number 4. You want to make sure that the RAM is fully inserted. I know that sounds pedantic, but I fix so many computers that have problems with the RAM not being pushed down all the way. There's not really anything here that we will need for this particular build. We didn't need a single accessory in here. And on the side here, this should be our Wi-Fi cabling. So that's the Wi-Fi antenna for this. We are hardwired, so we won't need to worry about the Wi-Fi. So that pretty much covers everything that we have to do to prepare the motherboard. Now we've got the case on its side ready to go. When you're installing your motherboard in the case, there's a lot of things that you need to be mindful for. Definitely make sure, as always, you're grounded by touching something that is metal. The case itself is enough. If it's steel, this is steel, the outside portions of the case are aluminum, which would not be enough to ground you. Each individual post in here is called a standoff. And those standoffs are what separate the steel metal of the case from the motherboard itself. If you put the motherboard on steel, run power through it, it can short it immediately. So the standoffs are very, very important. Most cases, 99% of good cases now, will come with every standoff installed in the exact position you need to have it installed in, and you don't need to really worry about making sure that they're tight. You can run your fingers through to make sure that each one of them is tight, and you can use some sort of a wrench to tighten them if necessary, but these are all installed from the factory, so they should all be installed properly. Additionally, motherboards have this back panel here. This is a little hard to do with this angle. This back panel is called the I/O, the input-output. A lot of them have an input-output shield that may not be on the motherboard. When that is not on the motherboard, you have to put it through the actual case in the back. It'd be where my hand is popping through right here is where the I/O shield would be. That's not required for a computer to have an I/O shield, but it can help prevent dust coming through onto the motherboard. And if you also improperly install it and bend it, you can actually have it so that you have some of the metal clips going inside of some of these slots, the USB, Ethernet, or something like that. I've seen that. It can short out a board. So if you don't have this already pre-installed on your board, make sure you're careful when installing it and don't let those components in the metal go inside of the actual ports. So now on to the install of the motherboard. So this case has a standoff that's right here that is a little bit risen that a screw is not meant to go into. That is going to be pretty much the center post, and that's going to line up right with this hole right here. And then you know that you've got everything all mounted in correctly, because it'll rest on the other ones, but that center one will actually go inside this hole here. So we're going to just navigate over to where the standoffs are, and boom. Hey, I forgot one. Now the motherboard is installed, so we can't move up or down, can't move in or out, because it's on that center post. Now all the other standoffs are going to line up with a screw hole, and your particular motherboard, your particular case, will come with the exact screws necessary to secure this. If there was one of the most important parts of the video, it is now. And that is when you're installing the screws, you have to use the exact proper screws. And you have to install them straight. You install them at an angle, you can cause a problem, you can damage the board. If you don't install them correctly and there's a wiggle room for these to move, that can damage the board, even on the first install. So we're gonna go through, this is the accessory case that came with the case, and we're gonna find the screws that we need. Now, most likely it's going to be in here because I see some that look all the same. You're going to use all the same screws. And in this case, we've got 3 on the bottom, another one here, so that's 4, and then should be one here, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 sometimes, but a screw can go in there but does not need to go in that center post. Okay. Because it's difficult to do this in the space that I'm on, we're going to look at a couple of the screws that we have with this case. These are most likely going to be mounting brackets for 3.5-inch drives. You've got an additional standoff here in case you need them for an extended motherboard or something like that. You've got what most likely is a motherboard standoff screw. You've got another hard drive mounting sort of screw, not an SSD sort of. And then this screw right here is most likely going to be for the SSD. This could also be for the standoffs, but I think it's going to be for the SSDs. Test install here to see. This is not, this one right here is not the standoff screw, because it went in, but it only went in a little bit. Normally it's because these have too many or too few threads per inch. Let's try the other one, which is the one that I thought was for the SSD. And that goes in like a glove. The motherboard manual and documentation should also tell you exactly where each screw belongs. And when you're using your screwdriver to put these in, you're using gentle force, but you're screwing it tightly. And you're making sure that the screwdriver, one, if it's not magnetic, that's the best. I don't believe this is a magnetic one. Yeah, it's not magnetic, so that's pretty cool. And you don't want to jam it into anything because you're dealing with very highly sensitive electronic equipment. And actually, if I am dealing with non-magnetic, I really don't want to lose one in that post there, so I'm going to use my magnetic screwdriver. So now that we have the board installed in the case set, the next part we're going to work on is going to be 2 installations of cables. The cables that I'm going to be installing at this point is going to be a CPU power cable and the 24-pin motherboard cabling. Both of them are white for my other power supply that I have. So there's 2 connectors here. The one on the left is ATX number 1. So that's what we're going to go ahead and install first, and only really at this point. So you have, this is a fully modular power supply. We have a section that goes to the power supply and then the section that goes to the component. You want to make sure that the component part is the one that's installed, and this leads down to the power supply. They should not be able to install improperly, but people have made crazy things fit. So first thing I'm going to do is lead probably through the top here. You have kind of an idea of how you want your runs to be, but don't worry about your first PC build being the most beautiful thing you've ever done, because it's just not going to be. I think going to the top there looks better than going through the side grommet, but let me see. You know what, we'll do side grommet. I've never really done side grommet like that before, and we should have enough clearance to get to the power supply in the back, so we're just going to do, yeah, side grommet. And then same thing for the 24-pin ATX. You've got 2 different sides, one that goes to the motherboard and then the other that goes to the power supply itself. So we're going to go ahead and install gently until it clips in all the way. And then I just lead the 24-pin connection out through this side grommet here. I think in the very beginning I talked about prepping the case for the fans and installs and everything like that, and then I did absolutely nothing for it. So we're going to come around to the other side back here and see kind of what we're dealing with. My case situation is going to be different than your case situation because I'm going to be taking the bottom feet off as I mount it. So there's going to be some components in here I don't need. So let's go through some of the wiring assets of this, and we'll talk more about it in detail when we are actually wiring some things up. We have a couple of things that come with the casing itself. So in this situation, we've got a couple of cables. You have the power switch, the hard drive LED, the reset switch, the power LED, positive and negative. So all these go into the front portion of the motherboard. It's very important that these get installed, especially the power switch right here. If there's any you don't install, it doesn't matter, just make sure you install the power switch. You will not get power without the power switch. I know it seems easy, I know it seems common, but it's not. All right, so then a couple of more things we have. This right here is going to be the HD audio. This is for the front input and output of the audio and microphone. This plugs into the bottom of the motherboard, and it plugs into a spot that's specific to those exact connections. This right here is the USB-C/Thunderbolt/3.2, whatever they want to call it nowadays. This plugs in to the motherboard as well. You might have 1 or 2 slots for this on your particular board. It just slides right in. And then the last one that we have here is the USB 3. Whoever invented this does deserve to make sure that they don't get to invent anything anymore. This connector is terrible. The pins break constantly through novice installation. It's very difficult to push in, and it's not very, easy to bend because it's very thick cable. So I wouldn't always recommend it right away, but on this build in particular, we actually have the freedom to be able to install the motherboard or the power supply right away. So since we can install a power supply right away, we're going to. This case actually, down here, has the ability to only install the motherboard in one orientation. That's going to be actually technically like this, because the fan is not going to be covered. It's going to have some airflow on the side of the case, but if you look at it right here on the other side of the case, if the fan were to face the other direction, it's going directly up against the backing for the motherboard. That's no good. This power supply we have here is the AX760. This is a platinum rated power supply, fully modular, so you only have the cables that you need and everything is easily labeled as to what goes where. So for this build, we're just going to be using the 24-pin ATX, the CPU, one of those, and then one of the GPUs, and probably one of the SATA things, maybe, because I think we have some color, some light, but I might get rid of this. I have to see what all it connects to, because it might just power this light bar here. I might not need it. I might not use it. I don't know yet. Here are 4 screws to install the power supply. They're all the same. They're hardware mounting brackets. They've got a little bit of a design in them, and that will be able to secure the power supply. So we're going to be doing the fan out and the modular connections out as well, and that just slides in right down here, and it will line up with the back down here. There's going to be 4 slots for the screws to go into for the power supply, and they just go right in. One of the easier things to install is going to be the power supply, because it doesn't slot into anything except the actual physical, formation of the case. The camera battery died just as I was getting to this point, so might be a little more confused as to where I left off, but I'm pretty sure I was working on installing this all-in-one cooler. So the first steps I like to do is figure out first where I'm going to install the cooler, and then secondly, based on that, where the fans are going to go. So with this one specifically, I was going to install it in either the upper portion like that, or in the sideways portion, but underneath, with the brackets and everything coming from the bottom. The challenge with this build, and this is what you need to think about when you're working on your own computer, is airflow. Airflow is very important to make sure that the computer is getting sufficient airflow. So this case here has the ability to have fans on the bottom, 3 120mm fans on the bottom, which will act as an intake, meaning that they will take cold air from the opposite side, so underneath the case, an intake. They'll bring in that cold air and suck it up through, and then you need to have exhaust fans. The rear is an exhaust fan because you have it taking the fan and the heat from the inside, exhausting it out of the case. You can do that on the top as well by having 3 120mm fans, those also acting as an exhaust, and they will pretty much just take all the hot air out of the case that way. That's very common with the all-in-one coolers. And then also you have the side of this case. Sometimes you have the front. This one has the rear side, or I guess the back of the case, that allows for some fans. This portion is going to be up against the wall from the wall mount. So that's where you have to think, do I want to exhaust air this way where it doesn't have a lot of room to go because it's going to be going right up against a wall and heating up this section and not really having anywhere to dissipate around the top of the case? Or do I want to have this be an intake for cool air? Well, it brings cool air in from the inside through here, and then we have this bringing in the cool air and then coming out of the top and the rear here. So I think because of that orientation, I'm going to install the all-in-one cooler on the top of the case. I'm going to have the tubes facing on the side of the RAM, so they're going to cross over the RAM and then connect into the CPU. So now that I know that, exactly how it's going to install in my computer, which is going to be like this, the next step is where the fans come into play. I'm using the exact fans that come with this Corsair cooler. They have 2 cables each. One cable is going to be for the actual 4-pin PWM, and then the other one is going to be a dedicated, I guess that's another 4-pin for the RGB. This will go into the hub that we'll get into later. We'll use both of these fans, and we're going to install both of these onto the all-in-one radiator. What's important to know is where the direction this is going to be installed, because you have these cables that sit out to the side here. So if you want a cleaner look, one of the easiest ways to get that is making sure that when you install the fans, these cables are going to the back of the case. So since the radiator is going to be installed this way, we don't want to install the fans this way. We have the fan cables on the front. So what we want to do is install them this way so that the fan cables are on the back and they'll lead right out of the back of the case. So before I install my all-in-one cooler, first I'm going to install the fans. So now that I know where they're going to be, I got them all laid out, I'm going to go ahead and do that portion. All this is taking these miscellaneous screws that came with the Corsair. Let me zoom in here. The miscellaneous screws that came with the Corsair all-in-one cooler. There's a couple of screws in here. Let's just dump them all out, see what we got. So we've got a ton of different screws, and some mounting points. So for starters, these 4 thicker thumb screws that we have, these 4 right here, are going to secure the pump over here to the motherboard. A little bit out of frame, but it's going to secure that. You'll see it when I do the install. These are important. Make sure you don't lose those. Otherwise, we have 12 to 16 of 2 different sizes of screws. These smaller size screws are going to be what we're going to use to install the radiator to the case. And then these longer size screws are what's going to be used to install the fans to the radiator. I just dropped one. I didn't drop a screw, I dropped a washer. So these washers are in place to go between the screw and, dropped another washer, the screw and whatever material you're working with. So let's see if I can show you. This is one of our fans, and you see it's got kind of a divot there. That allows the screw to hold right in place. It's not going to go anywhere. If you had a fan that did not have that sort of placement, or if it's a thinner metal like we might see on the case a little bit later, that's when you're going to want to take one of those washers and put it right in. That extends the size of the head of the screw, so that way it has more material to catch onto so it doesn't go through what you're trying to install it into. Most Corsair cases and Corsair components go together in a way where they don't require that configuration. But some other cases, like we might find out with this one, may require those additional washers. So I'm just going to go ahead and slightly install these screws before we move on to the next project. So those are installed. They're not tightened or anything like that. They're just on to kind of hold things in place. Do a second fitting to make sure that where you're going to install this cooler is going to actually line up. So remember, ours again, this is the front, and then this is the back. The back is what has these cables. It's very important for a cleaner run. While we're on the subject of cases, as I was mentioning, we're going to be using these smaller screws, and they're going to go through this metal portion here, and that's going to hold the radiator in with the case and secure it to the case. This metal right here is a little too open. It will hold, but it's a little too open for my liking. So what I'm going to do on the 8 mount points for these, I'm going to install a washer on each one of them. Apologies for the way that that looks. I'm going to install a washer on every one of them, and then we're going to get a much more secured hold because it has that washer for that additional material on the head of the screw. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be doing additional fans. So let me get my fan bucket. I just have all these different fans and accessories for fans. So we'll kind of see, right? We're going to be doing a uniform sort of look. That will not fit there. You could actually fit that on top. You could fit them on the bottom as well. You could not fit them on the sides. Again, look at the case documentation. The case will tell you these sort of things. I just don't want to be reading while I'm on camera. It's not because I don't read good. So what I would like to do is install fans that look as close as possible to the fans that I'm using for my cooler. So I think these Corsair ones right here should do the trick. These are 120 millimeters. I might not put a fan here. And if they're all, are they gonna all be RGB or are they not gonna be all RGB? Am I going for white? Am I going for red, green, blue? Choices are kind of mine, choices are not kind of mine. So what might work well? Better yet, this is gonna be horrendous to edit. Thank you, past me, for this. It's sorry to future me. You know what, I'm gonna do whatever I wanna do. And what I want to do is install 2 140s down on the bottom, 3 120s here, and a single 120 there. Got it. How long was this? I guess while we're at it right now, you see that you have a graphics card. You need to see where the graphics card is going to install. You want to install the graphics card in the top slot of your motherboard for a couple of different reasons. First one is it allows for the best airflow. Secondly, you're going to want to do it that way because it'll be able to take advantage of the most PCI Express lanes that you have. This is an X16, usually this is an X8, and then usually this is an X4. Sometimes you might have a 16/8/8/4, but it's to take advantage of all the lanes, you want to plug this into the top. It can work on the bottom slots, but your graphics card will not be able to function to its full potential. So this goes in right here, and so that means that I'm gonna need to take out these 2 thumb screws. We can remove the rear pieces of metal that are being held in, and they should just pop right out. They shouldn't be attached in any sort of way, especially if you're using the same exact case I have, and they might even fall out. We don't need these slot covers anymore. This is gonna be where the graphics card goes. Feel free to hang on to these if you want to. I normally do not, but you definitely want to make sure you hang on to the thumb screws themselves because they're going to be what holds the graphics card in place. Now, do not install the graphics card yet though, because if you install the graphics card now, you're going to have a harder time seeing everything else that needs to be wired up, because we still need to install the all-in-one cooler. We need to install the wires to the all-in-one cooler. We have the front I/O, all these cables that need to be installed all on the front here. So really make sure that you have the most visibility when you're doing this. So I usually save the graphics card to be the last thing I install. Now onto the installation of the fans. A lot of this next segment is sped up between 200 and 1000%. So enjoy. We start by removing the bottom bracket. This will have two 140mm fans installed in an intake position, bringing cold air from underneath the case into the case. I was using 2 screws instead of 4 in the event that I needed to shift the alignment of the fans, which I did need to do. It took me a bit to figure out the exact position that I wanted each fan in. Next up was adding 3 120mm fans in the back side of the case as an intake position to draw cool air from the outside, just like the 2 fans on the bottom. The rear 120mm fan and the top 240mm radiator fans will act as exhaust fans. I install the 120mm fans using 2 screws as well, so I can easily adjust them to the proper position when I'm nearing completion of the build. The side of the fan that is bare is the side that the air will go into, and the side of the fan with the plastic backing is where the air will exhaust out of. So keep that in mind when installing your fans for intake and outtake positions. Alright, so I'm back and I was able to find a couple of things that might be a solution. The changes that I made is that instead of using this ML 120mm that connects directly into the board itself, I'm just going to go ahead and swap that out with a additional 120mm RGB fan that has the RGB connections, because I do have 7. And if I have 7, I might as well have 8. If I have 8, I might as well have 12, because there's no way for me to extend the RGB color of this. I dug around in my fan box and I found this. This is just another 6-port RGB hub. Unfortunately, it's only RGB. I do have another commander strip that is 6 RGB and 6 fans, but I don't need that yet. And this already has, just the RGB, and that's all I need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pair my CPU fans with this Y-split PWM cable. So that way I can have one lead for the 2 fans, and that should be correct. So finally, we can move on to installing the all-in-one cooler into the top. So one of the things that this computer has is right here is a cover for the CPU fan. It's just a little rubber cover. So I removed that because we need the header access. And I've also got another one for a CPU optional. Now, if you're ready for a tech tip, it involves this Sharpie. What I'm going to do is make sure that I know every fan and every fan header. Because I have 2 different ways to plug these things in, all of these have the RGB hub for the fans, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they also have the fan themselves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you want to individually address and control the fans, or you want them to do something in a specific order, 1 to 6, 1 to 7, 1 to whatever, they have to be addressable, and you have to know what fan is what. So if you have fan 1, 5, 2, 4, 6, and you want to address them in that way, it's going to be confusing. So what I like to do is take a silver Sharpie, or whatever you can really have, and mark on the individual addressable connections what they're going to be. 1, 2, so on and so forth. So that way when you wire everything in the back, you know exactly what's going to be number 1, number 2. So we're just going to make it easy. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which means I also have to install this fan in the rear and mount those cables up. So the fans are a long, arduous, painful process and can easily be one of the longest parts of the build, because for all of these we have 16 total wires just for the fans. That's more than anything else we're going to be wiring up today. It's just all the fans. And then once we have the fans installed and the coolers mounted, we just put the graphics card in, make sure all the front I/O on the bottom is plugged in, and then you're good to go. So now in the back of the case, after I got all the fans labeled, this is kind of what we're dealing with still, that we will tackle as to where everything goes, how it all plugs in, and a proper way to mount it. One of the things I did forget about this particular case is it has a bracket that goes along the back here, that is the bracket that I drilled holes into for the wall mounting. So that's what's missing from this case, but otherwise it's just kind of an open space. You had a couple of things here as well that I've removed, but again, just kind of open space. It doesn't have a lot of channels for the cables to go to, it just has grommets. It does have a couple of zip tie sort of things and little anchor points for you to install something, but you don't have any channels for a lot of cabling to go. So I guess it's kind of good, but otherwise we'll just have a giant smorgasbord of just things in the back here. Another thing that I might be doing specific for my case is removing the bottom feet, which is going to be removing access to this bottom USB 3 header, which is really okay, and maybe some RGB coloring along the front light strip here, which I might not need anyway. So on top of what we're going to be adding from the CPU power and the motherboard power is at least a couple of more cables, potentially up to this many cables. We have some SATA power leads in here depending on how many things we need to power, and then we've also got our graphics card lead. I did grab another CPU connector if I did need that as well for this motherboard. I shouldn't, but if I do, I've got it and I know that I can just run it along the same line as my original one. The final fan to install is this rear 120mm fan. It's going to have the cabling go up the case the same way that this 8-pin CPU power is going, and we're going to try to make it look as clean as possible. Unless you buy custom made cables, I think I've said this several times already, you will not get an exceptionally clean run, and there will be wires everywhere. This fan is going to be an exhaust fan where it's taking the warm air from inside the case and pushing it out. We're also going to have exhaust fans on the top pushing that out. We're bringing cool air in from the side and cool air in from the bottom of the case to help create a nice airflow channel. We also have twisty ties on everything. This is only the first one. We'll have to take all those twisty ties off. So what we're trying to do is get this cabling right here to look as clean as possible, which is a little difficult because of where it does have to go. There's no real way to hold that over there. So it's possible that going up this hole here instead of down in this grommet could be a cleaner look, and it is okay to do multiple runs multiple times, install different things in different ways. It's okay for this to take a while. It's okay for there to be confusion. It's okay for there to be questions, because we're also going to have the all-in-one radiator here. Let's see about how much space we're going to be working with a mini little test fit. We want the fans to be lined up. Yeah, it's actually going to be such a thing. I think that'd be fine. So what I was going for is actually this tiny little doodad right here. This has double-sided tape. It will go inside here, and then I can route the cabling right through it in this tiny little opening. So if this little tiny little thing, mount that inside the case with these two cables to keep them out of the way. This came with some case, maybe a Fantex case, but that little thing right there is all that we had to get in. So now that fan is lined up and ready to go where it needs to go. That is adhered there, so it's kind of just nicely out of the way so you won't see the cable really. That's just more of an advanced technique because I didn't want that to be visible. So now here is the fun part with what we're going to be installing next. We have a couple of cables that we're going to be working on right here. We've got the cables that I'd already mentioned for the commander hub stuff and the fan. Whether or not you install the CPU pump first or the all-in-one first is really personal preference as long as you have the space. So I have a lot of clearance, and I'm gonna get this installed and show you what that clearance means. But for starters right now, all I'm gonna do is take my screws, I'm going to line this up approximately where it's going to go. I'm going to gently, with my thumbs, screw in a couple of these screws. Now these screws are already threaded with the washer on them. I think I might have mentioned that earlier, but make sure you pre-thread the screws, and we're using 8 screws here. And we're really just going to install 4 of them in the corners, because then we can have both of our hands free. You might not be able to do it with your thumbs, and that's okay. Just take one at a time with the screwdriver and get them in, get them installed slightly. So as you can see, we've got the ability to move this back and forth. What I wanted to show you is right up here. See how much clearance I have? I have full access to the CPU connection right there, and I have full access to the grommet under here. So I can route things easily there after I've gotten this installed. Otherwise, if you didn't have that much clearance, I'd recommend installing the pump first, so that way you can put the wires where they need to go and then install this. But with this clearance, that's not a problem. So the next thing that we're gonna do is route the fan cables I'm just going to straighten these cables out just a little bit after we take the zip ties off them to get a little bit of a cleaner run. And you also want to be able to have fans coming in, or like cables coming in different areas as well. Because if you've got everything all in one clump area, you might not be able to close the back of your computer. So already you can see how many more fans and cables we have in the back. It's becoming unruly a little bit already. If you guys remember, I was going to use a Y splitter for my 2 CPU fans. So I don't forget, this was fan number 1 in the back, 2 and 3. So I'm gonna take numbers 2 and 3 for the PWM and connect those to this Y splitter. And then I can always undo this and rewire them as necessary. Next is going to be installing the all-in-one cooler. The pump is going to be installed with the copper and the thermal paste going onto the actual socket of the processor itself. Your cooler should have a plastic protective covering. This has to come off. If you do have to add your own thermal paste, you're going to take a tube of thermal paste, preferably something good from Arctic Silver or Grizzly, do a X down the middle, and then apply it that way. That will give you the most even spread. We have these 2 cables and connections. One of them we're going to route. That's this big one here that's going to the commander node. This one is going to go in the back through the grommet for now. That's going to go in the back. This connection right here, this is the 3-pin CPU fan. This plugs into the CPU fan. I know we're dealing with a liquid cooler, but this is not in that way. This is not an advanced or sophisticated liquid cooling system. So if you have a CPU or AIO pump, you might be able to install it in there, but usually if you only have the one lead, you want to plug it directly into the CPU fan. If there's any nuances, check your motherboard manufacturing, check specific guides on your motherboard for that. The next step is going to be installing the CPU heat pump, CPU cooler to the actual processor itself. We have these specific screws. These are just thumb screws. Pretty difficult to show. If I have any issues, add it in post. We take the CPU plastic backing off, so we just have access to the actual copper block itself. Don't touch any of this. We're going to carefully line it up with all 4 screw holes. And then once it's lined up with all 4 screw holes, by the way, this is probably easier for you to do if the case is lying down, and then make a touch to the board. I'm going to utilize the grommet on the right side and hold that down with my thumb as I get one of my screws and try to make connection. We're not tightening all the way yet. We're going to do all 4 to make a connection, and then we're going to tighten in a diagonal pattern. This is just enough to hold it in place, then we'll tighten it with our screwdriver later. So just get the threading on there, and if you're doing this with the case lying down, it's a lot easier because you won't be dropping anything. I have to work on these a lot. I'm used to doing them when they're vertical like that. I'm also a lefty, so that helps. We're going to start in the top left. We're going to screw it down all the way until it stops. It's going to be a lot of screws until it stops. Go to the bottom right, same thing. We're going to screw it all the way in, a lot of turns, and then we're going to go to the bottom left, a lot of turns, and then the upper right. That is fully secured. There should be no gaps. If you install this at an angle, if it doesn't make full connection, you will burn out and you will kill your processor. So it is very important to make sure that this is as secured as possible and being held in, and you know that it's making a sufficient contact. What you can do if you're unsure is after you push in the cooler to the processor, and if you're just not sure if it's making a connection or not, you can pull the heatsink back off and look at the thermal paste. If you have a good amount of thermal paste spreading on the processor, then you have put it on correctly. There are a lot of things where if you do the thermal paste and then you take it off and then you put it back on, you can lessen the effective quality of it. And while that is true, it's better than having a dead CPU by not making connection. It is a common mistake that happens frequently. I'm going to try to pull either down this way, maybe that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the CPU 3-pin first. We're going to bring that thing after. So just kind of do the best you can. If that doesn't even show up on camera, you're not going to really have to worry about it showing up in a build. There you have all that. If you're not breaking a sweat, you're not doing it right. We've almost got everything in the front all taken care of. We have the all-in-one cooler mounted. The next couple of steps are going to be a lot of the tedious wire management, bringing cables up for this section down here, installing the graphics card, installing the power to the graphics card, and then hopefully we'll be able to get to post. Now we have this commander root deal, commander whatever heck. I probably call it 15 different things now. When this is going to be installed, you want to make sure that the white connection on the actual cabling lines up with the white connection dot on the commander probe. It just goes in. We've got that. We don't really need this for now. We will eventually need to plug in the USB to the front of the motherboard and then SATA to the SATA power itself. But for now, we don't really need that. Same with all the fans. We don't really need the fans at this point because usually the fans are what I'm going to save for last because those are going to be the most modular and most accessed thing. So we're going to run the rest of the cabling first. I'm not going to use this bottom USB 3 because that's coming off, because that's what the bottom, at least that's the plan anyway. You'll see if it changes before I know right now. This is a RGB header that plugs up here that I'm not sure if I'm using. I just didn't want that for now because that's not going to go into the plan. All this is all for the same thing. SATA power and an addressable LED strip. That's all for the bottom piece, which I might not be using. So I'm not going to focus on that for now. I will add those in. That's a me problem for the future. These fans, we're going to leave those zip tied for now because we don't need to worry about those. Next for me is seeing where this goes. This is that metal bar that I was talking about that I'm going to use to mount onto the wall. This came with the case, but I'm utilizing this. When you're doing the cabling, you want to make sure that you're not going to impede anything that's supposed to go back here. So I can't just leave a giant amount of things here, but I also have a ton of clearance space in the back here. I can pretty much just have all my cables mounted and dangling down there and not really have to worry about any clearance issues with that. The main things we have, we're going to be pulling through this grommet here. We're going to have a couple of USB headers. We're going to have the front input and output power connections. We're going to have a front HD audio connection. We're going to have a USB 3 connection, which is actually out of frame right now. It's coming up over here near the CPU pin. And we're also going to have a USB-C connection, which is also right near the motherboard connection. So we're going to start and focus on the bottom pieces first. Unfortunately, that also deals with my 2 RGB connections, so I need to get those ready as well. We've got the USB addressable header, another USB. As you can see, there are 5 pins on the top, or 5 holes on the top, 4 on the bottom. That will coincide with the slots on your motherboard, and your motherboard will also say if it is USB or not. And you do some basic wire management while you're kind of doing these things. There's so many cables and so many wires, you will have to redo a couple of things, so don't think you're going to get it perfect on the first shot. This right here is going to be the HD audio. This also has 5 on the top and 4 on the bottom, but the spacing for the 4 on the bottom, the missing spot, is different. That usually coincides with the far left pin connection on your motherboard, and in this case, the text HD audio is going to be facing upward when it gets installed. That will give you your front mic and front speakers if your case supports those. But the final connections we have are going to be right here. This is usually the most dastardly of all of them, and this connects your front, in this case, power, reset, HDD LED, and power LED. These all have a very specific way with which they connect, but they all have been the same with every computer for the most part. Check your motherboard documentation to make sure. First, we have power LED, plus and minus. That's going to go in the far left pins. You can extend these cables if you need to. And then we're going to have the HDD LED directly underneath. Continuing on the top right, for the next 2 slots, we're going to have the power switch, and then underneath that, we're going to have the reset switch. So to make it easier, I'm going to remove the power switch, install the reset switch first because I can see those 2 pins, and then we're going to install the power switch. And the next things we have to install are going to be the USB 3 header right here, and then the USB-C header up there. So when you have an excessive amount of cabling, that is almost as bad as having less amount of cabling. The next cable we have is this USB-C based cable. This one goes in usually one direction. If it gives you any trouble when you're trying to push it in, rotate it. I didn't see any clear indicator markers of that, but do not force anything. Nothing needs to be forced. The next one is this USB 3 connection. This is a thick boy, and it has 10 pins on the top and 10 pins on the bottom. One on the bottom, in this case, my bottom left pin is blanked out, or it is filled in, not blanked. That's going to line up with the missing pin on the motherboard, and then there's also going to be a notch on the front face of the pin of the cable itself that is going to line up with the notch on the motherboard, so you know exactly how this needs to be installed. You don't get a lot of clearance on this. We got to make a big bend on this cable. We got to go in and we got to plug it in. Look at that. This is how much is going to be sticking out from this. These pins are among the most fragile when you're trying to install them. They're the most temperamental, and the pins inside will snap easily if you install it incorrectly. The next thing that we're going to do is route the fan connections through the grommets in the bottom. Notice we haven't done much with zip ties yet. There's an intention behind that. There's also a time and a place for that. So I'm going to add one tiny little cable tie just down here to keep those fans going in the same sort of direction there. We'll modify that as necessary. Now that we have all of this all set up and all plugged in and wired, we can do the fun part. One of the fun parts, I should say, because the next step we have is installing the graphics card. I'm using a Asus Strix GTX 1080 graphics card. Now, your graphics card, general basis for what you're going to be doing when you're installing the graphics card is obviously plugging in the PCI slot pins into the PCI slot on the actual motherboard. If you have a riser cable, I would avoid using that. I would go directly to the motherboard. You want to use the top slot on the motherboard, and you want to have the corresponding holes to the side there. Mine only requires 2 slots, so both slots are going to be removed and vacant, and we just line it up with where the slot is at. How much of this can I do one-handed? So we take the graphics card and we mount it up with the slot itself. Once it's lined up right there, you push it in with your hand gently until it clicks or until it gets secured. There's sometimes right in the right there, that's hard to see on this section, but right there, that is a clip mechanism that should shut. I don't know if you heard that click on the microphone, but it is now fully secured. You have a little bit of sag here because it's not screwed in, and you might have such a large graphics card that you need to have an additional support bracket. The 1080 doesn't require that, so we're just going to go ahead and get the thumb screws and install those here so that way the graphics card is secured. One of the final fun parts on the front here is going to actually be installing the graphics card power. In this application, what we need is going to be a 8-pin and a 6-pin. So one of these, this one right here, we can slide up and off. So then we create a 6-pin and an 8-pin. We're just going to plug in our 8-pin adapter, and then on this other side, we're going to plug in our 6-pin adapter. Now that that's done, we're going to take the GPU power lead, route it through the grommet down below. So I just alternated the 2 power leads to see which one would look nicer. Then I can bring this 2-pin extra piece right here. I can route it through the grommet as well because I won't need that. And then I have a little bit cleaner of a look for the graphics card. I'm going to take a small little zip tie right here to tie those together. And I don't have the tool. We'll cut that and make that smaller. And then that way when we lead this in, it kind of takes the whole thing with it. Ready to record wire management snafu stuff. Now that we're back, just a couple of more prep things. We've got this nice peel. Whew. That was a peel and a half. What I've decided is for this top radiator up here, that's going to go in this position. So now that I know it's going to go in this position, pushed over, I'm just going to go ahead and tighten up the screws. Oh man, so many wires. I would personally say that this case is an advanced case when it comes to building. This is not entry-level case. It's not difficult, but if you don't know what you're doing and you have a whole bunch of extra stuff, it's going to be overwhelming. And that's the first thing when you're doing a build. You don't want to just be overwhelmed. You want to actually maybe have fun and enjoy the build. So I'm just going to kind of get a little bit of a idea of where everything is at and what everything is, so I know the next steps and what we're going to tackle. So I'm just going to start to organize kind of things based on where they need to go. Fans, like I said, I'm probably going to save the fans for last because those are an absolute monstrosity of a pain. I'm going to use this cable tie portion up here, route the 24-pin connector through it, and then connect it. That'll give it a little bit of a anchor point and get it away from the remainder cables for right now. We will also need, for this build, 2 SATA power leads, potentially a 3rd SATA power lead if I'm using this front RGB strip, which I'm probably going to use. So to future-proof myself and to not cause any problems for myself, I'm going to add in a SATA power adapter that has 4 leads for power to it. And that's going to be just for the power supply, and that can kind of go in after the fact. It's not really that big of a deal. This is my zip tie from earlier that came back. Now it's actually funny what I'm going to do. I'm going to rewire here, and this is what I said can happen. Instead of going through that rubber grommet, I'm going to bring the cabling down underneath the case. That'll make it a much cleaner look on the back or on the front and makes it a little bit easier to pull that stuff through. I'm going to route that underneath all of these other things because I plan on kind of resettling all these wires back to where they need to go and then adding in the fans afterwards, because the fan hub controller is most likely going to go on the back of this because I have 2 of the hubs and they do have adhesive backings to them. There are several different ways to wire manage. I've got these little Corsair Velcro ties that usually come in handy in a lot of different cases for Corsair. And I've got a plethora of zip ties. Generally speaking, when you are doing wire management, you want to be careful. You don't want to zip tie everything and its mother to everything, because if in the event that something doesn't work or you need to replace something, it's an absolute mess to have to undo all the zip ties. So I think we know for sure we can put a zip tie here for all of these things to be together. You can sometimes secure it to the case, sometimes you can't. This section right here that has a hole in it, you could put a zip tie through there, right? But the case mount slides in there and holds the back of the case in place. So you can't really use that. This is kind of a tricky case, like I said, when it comes to mounting these things inside of it. They don't have a lot of channels and grooves, so you're kind of stuck doing the best that you can with what you're given. If you see what I'm saying about all these cables here, they're all different lengths. And because they're all different lengths, you can't really do anything besides bundle them together if you want to make a clean run. And you don't really want them going in front of the fans either. So you kind of want it to be down as low as you can, but already we're dealing with this. I think this is the USB-C connection. That can only go so far. And since it can only go so far, you're not gonna have as much space. So I think what I wanna do, I wanna move the fans up. And then what that will allow me to do is install the bottom plate. And the bottom plate cover will allow us to hide more wires. If you notice here, I've only done 2 screws diagonally for each of these fans because I wanted to be able to do this if I needed to. So now that I know I want the fans up top, I can add in this metal plate, and that should be able to go right in the bottom here. I now cover up and I can put a whole bunch of stuff right down here and not have it in view of the fans. They're still gonna be bundled and they're still gonna be grouped together, unfortunately. This is about as good as we can make it. It won't be that bad. You know, what we could do is something like this. I don't recommend that, but I only have so many hands. Instead of a zip tie, we use these little Corsair Velcro straps. And not only do they allow you to add a lot in, you're not committed once you do that. So see, I got the Velcro strap. It can't really hold it there, but the side panel will hold that flush. And we're not gonna use, as far as I can tell, any of these things. But again, this is future me problem. You can see that we're dealing a little bit better with some of the cabling. We got clear runs over on this side. We have these fans still to deal with, but they're all easily accessible. They're out. And since they're not zip tied with anything, we have more freedom of where we want to move them. We might be able to do all the fans up top somewhere over here on the back of the deal, or we might have to move it somewhere else. But for now, we're still not dealing with the fans, believe it or not. What we're going to add in is this 8-pin CPU connection. And what I'm going to do real quick, I've got this extra 2-pin that wasn't used, so I'm just going to drop that down so it doesn't get in the way. There is no way to reasonably easily show you this on film as I'm doing the actual install because the lighting and the angles of it. But all you're gonna do is find where these go and plug them in. I'm gonna deal with the bottom and then the top rows first to make sure I can read everything correctly. And I'm gonna take the graphics card, I'm going to put that underneath all the other cables, including the fans on the bottom, to just make a clean run down, because I know this cabling doesn't need to go anywhere else. And we can pull that a little bit and just kind of tuck it away. If you guys would have an interest in watching a full-blown cabling guide, let me know. I'm adding a little bit in this, but there's so much to go over in cabling. You can't do it in a build guide. This is kind of where the runs are going. I guess that's really okay if they're all under like that. So then I'm going to grab an additional Corsair cable, Velcro strap, and just bundle all these together over here. Now it's possible I can do another one right here, and I will for now. Because again, this isn't the end all be all. This is trying to see what looks good and then adding things to it. So it's looking still like a mess, but I promise you it is getting better and it is looking nicer. Really, unless you have this exact case, there's not really much of a purpose in paying attention to what I'm doing because your cable runs are going to be different. The general aspect is the same, but when it comes in the back to what you're doing, you just try to make them look as clean as possible and as neat as possible, and each individual case will vary. By the way, From CableMod and other cable manufacturers, you can buy specialized cables that will exactly fit the length of the run that you need. So if you want to get a cable that goes from here, stretches around, and then comes in here, you can get that length. If you want to get one that goes directly up right there with a very short cable, you can do that as well. And in order to do a perfect special cable job, that's the only choice you have, because otherwise you're going to have a bunch of cables someplace. I have, similar to what I used for one of the fans up on the other side here, I have a cable management deal that is also 3M tape on the back, and then we'll put it here, and then we can run the cables through it, so that way we can keep this entire bunch of cables right over here where we want them to be. Because when I'm working on the fans, I don't want these going all over the place. It's unfortunate that we can't just do a simple zip tie with a little bit of metal over here, but due to the way that the case is designed, we have to have these additional tools at our disposal. It's understandable that you might not have something like this. I'm just going to hold that there for a little bit so it will actually stay, and then we can go on to the fans. I'm almost done with untethering these fans. So now that we have all of the fan leads out and accessible, now we can start figuring out where they're going to go. If you're going to have a bunch of cables massed together in a giant lump, this is where they're going to be. If you had a very pretty looking cable build so far, kiss it goodbye, because you cannot make 16 of these thin, delicate cables look good. You have them leading from all these different locations, and you can try to channel them together. Like, I've got some that I can channel. I'm going to use a couple more zip ties than I normally use on these. So I'm going to try to find the thinnest zip ties that I have, and we're going to find the metal posts. The metal posts look like this right in here, and there's a couple of them up top that we're going to go ahead and lead some fans through to help elevate where they're going to be at. So you just want to make sure that you have all the fans in the zip ties first, and then you add a little bit of a zip. I could maybe bring all of these up to a central point, but I have to go through this zip tie thing over here first. I'm gonna make this one a bigger zip tie. We have these to bring up. That might be it. I don't think these are going to fit. We can lead those up as well. And then if we get all the central fans right here, that would actually be quite nice. I'm going to change the position of the fans down below. I'm going to route them underneath the front panel connectors. We're going to get a third zip tie. We're going to add it to this channel down here. And we're going to bring that, we're going to go underneath the motherboard cable here. We're going to come up through this zip tie at the top. So we kind of have a nice channel of these coming up and amassing in the top. We're going to pull everything that we know that's coming through the bottom. I'm going to pull it on up. In fact, we can get these in there too. We can add two more. So we're channeling them up through this. Channeling them up through this top one here, and bringing them all the way through. And you just want them to kind of be out of the way for a bit. So we're going to tighten this lead down here. We're going to tighten that strand of cables. We're going to hold them all together, tighten them while we tighten that zip tie. And then that will make sure that these cables stay in this channel run so far where we've gotten them. I do want to take these additional cables and I want them to run under the 24-pin motherboard cable. And the 24-pin motherboard cable will press them, so we don't need to add a zip tie here. Okay, so we want to have all the cables set up through this zip tie, and we want to make them taut. Want to make them tight. What we did is we took all the fans that were down here and on the side, we took those fans, routed them down here, straight in a line, made it a tight line, zip tie here, zip tie up here, and then this is still all that we're dealing with. Aren't you glad that we labeled these? Could you imagine trying to figure out which one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Now, you couldn't. It'd be impossible to do that. So labeling them beforehand is very important. The smallest ones that we have are these cables right here. 7 and 8 don't have that far to go. This is pretty much where the end of the line is. Any ones that are going really, really low, we need to bring those back around and loop them up so they're all taut back here. And just to move them out of the way, I'm going to plug these in real quick to the hub. That way I know I won't inadvertently move these cables. So congratulations, you're kind of getting a little advanced cable management wiring 101 with all of these ludicrous amounts of fans. Welcome to my leg. In the world of computers, you do what you gotta do. So this is where we run into a little bit of a bulk problem because we don't have anywhere else for these fans to go unless we want to route them back over here and then come back. That might work out okay, but some of these are going to be small, like this one right here, number 6. Isn't going to be able to make it if we do that. So we don't want to do all of that commitment with one. And we kind of are done with this cable for the power connection to the commander probe. So we don't need that right now. We're just going to tuck that over to the side. I'm going to zip tie them together at the top. And we're going to bring this back down underneath the 24 pin connection for the motherboard. We're going to attempt to zip tie them to this post down here in a straight, tight fashion. So now what we're left with is this. Much smaller, much more reasonable, much more manageable to deal with. And we can probably plug all of these in some capacity right here. And with this case, that's most likely going to mean we're going to mount this hub maybe on the back somewhere. It depends on what my options are. It might just lay there, or it might be mounted. I'm not sure yet. It depends on how this wall mounting bit goes for me. Friends, I welcome you to The Don Does Not Know How to Count to Save His Life. This is the 3rd or 2nd time. I don't even know how many times I made a mistake. I now need to use this additional commander hub because I can't count. I only have one of these adapters that will, the Y cable splitter. In my silliness, I don't need that anymore because I changed a fan connection in the back. This was going to be just a regular 4-pin, but I changed it to 4-pin plus the RGB. So it can't go to the board, it has to go here. So instead of using this RGB hub only, I have to use this commander root hub. A couple of things were messed up, but that's okay. That's okay. I've got 2 of these hubs now. One hub is going to be connecting 6 fans, the other hub is going to be connecting 2 fans. So first and foremost, I need to undo this doohickey. And then second, I need to install this doohickey. There's no real changes except this one's a little bit larger. If this is yet another mistake and it doesn't work out, I'm going to throw this whole thing out the window. So I think what I'm going to do is I've got 2 connected here. I'm going to use this one as the primary hub and have that down below. And I'm going to use all of these for this, and I'm going to use the 2 up here for that. So this is 7 and 8. 7 and 8 are on here. Perfect. Wonderful. It works out beautifully. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all go here. So then we got to find out where all these are at. So this is number 2, and this is a 2 fan. 1, 6, 5. I feel like the lock-picking lawyer, except I think the lock-picking lawyer knows how to count. This is number 3. And then the same thing on the hubs. Hub number 1, 2, 6, 5, 3, 4. I'm probably just going to leave these here because if I put this on top of it, you can't even tell. Okay, boom, it's perfect, beautiful. Nobody saw anything. So next step, we have these power leads that go to SATA power. Those can just plug into any free SATA port. This goes in a SATA port on the motherboard itself, which are marked peripheral and SATA. And then these can just pretty much be grouped together in whatever way makes the most logistical sense. We're gonna go ahead and take another one of these and just shove this nicely under here. We can make these better as time goes on. Like, we can choose how they're going to sit, but for now, we don't have to worry about it. We can just sit back, put this in place. So there you have it. The next couple of things that I'm going to do is going to be off camera, is going to be clipping the excess off of the zip ties. Carefully, don't clip the actual wire, and then doing a boot test. I will probably get the boot test on camera, just with no audio. I'll probably talk over it. And that way we can show that it's going into Windows, because there's nothing else to do on this computer now. It is 100% built out. I just have these extra cables that I don't know if I'm going to use. That's a me thing. Everything else is fully wired and fully ready to go. This could be a little bit better, but for now and what it is and how it's going to be hidden, it's really, I can't complain. Because once you put this on, you can't even tell. It's a beautiful run. You just get rid of that, get rid of this, push this in a little bit more, snake that down there, and you just have a beautiful, clean looking run in the back. Then on the front of this beautiful build, everything is pretty set. You can't really see much. The fans are where they need to be. I need to trim this cable right here, but otherwise everything is pretty set and straightforward in that capacity as well. So now it's going to be on to the boot test. You're going to need your power cable, monitor cable, keyboard and mouse cables, along with a way to connect to the internet, be it Ethernet or Wi-Fi. During your first power cycle, you may notice the PC restarting several times, or taking several minutes to get into the BIOS. This is normal. You may also see a screen that pops up saying, "New CPU detected. Press F1 to go into the BIOS," or something similar. If you do not get power, double check all your power connections, including the front I/O, along with making sure that your RAM is properly inserted. My solid-state drive already had an image of Windows 10 from my previous editing PC, but you will need a USB stick to install Windows 10 or 11 on your system. These are free to download and make from the Microsoft website using their media creation tool. It's like a mirror. Wait, oh, you're back. The video's over? You watched the whole thing? Man, you are absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for watching this video. Unless you skipped here, then you're just slightly less awesome, you know, unless you just wanted the sneak peek to see if it actually worked, which, you know, congratulations, it works. I mean, you could see that from the intro of the video, I think. And I hope that watching this video gave you a little bit of insight on some stuff that you can learn for your next build, or stuff you can share with your friends. If you know somebody that's watching, or if you know somebody that's trying to build a computer and is having issues or anything like that, send them this video. If you have any questions about anything with videos, feel free to put them in the comments down below. Not with videos, with building computers. I would love to be able to help you in any way that I can. If you have any questions while I'm live, I stream video games live over at twitch.tv/uptiltgaming. Drop me a follow there, ask me some tech questions. I'm more than happy to answer them while I'm trying to play video games. But thank you so much for watching this video, commenting, liking, subscribing, all that sort of good stuff. My name is Ben the Don. This is TheDonTech, and I cannot wait to continue using this awesome computer for all the projects in the future. As always, you better remember, the Dons got your back. Is this cool at all?